Hi, I am so delighted to welcome you this afternoon to Shofuso here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. My name is Andrew Lunny. I am the Educational Programs Assistant at the Decorative Arts Trust, and I'm joined today by Peter Ballman with Shofuso, who's going to lead us on both a house and a garden tour. We're absolutely thrilled to be here, and I turn it over to Peter. Peter, thank you for having us.
Right, thank you for coming. So welcome to Shofuso. Brief history. First question that many people ask when they come to visit is, how did this house get here in the middle of West Fairmount Park? So to talk about that, we always go back to the 1876 centennial. And in 1876, this was the site of a World's Fair. It was Japan's first time participating in a World's Fair. And just where you walked in, if you were to walk 5 minutes east of that area right there, you would be at the site of the first ever Japanese style garden in North America. If you went out there today, there would be almost no sign that that garden ever existed, except for one lone stone lantern, similar to the one behind you. And that's been there since 1876. So this was the first kind of Japanese presence in Philadelphia. Now, if you fast forward to 1905, we're at another World's Fair. This one's taking place in St. Louis. And Japan also participated in this World's Fair. They went even bigger. They had a Nihonman, which is a 2-story temple gate, and all kinds of traditional woodwork that was part of their exhibition. There were 2 wealthy Philadelphia businessmen who really liked that temple gate and thought it would look really cool in West Fairmount Park. So they purchased it and brought it here. The foundation is under our house right now. So at that time, you had another garden that was built around the temple gate. So there's been a continuous presence of a Japanese style garden since 1909 here in West Fairmount Park. We're going to fast forward even a little bit more, but before we do that, I would like to enter the house and stop at our first garden. So we're going to enter here. We're going to step up and remove our shoes before we head into the house. This area is your genkan, and it's always going to be the first place that you stop any entry point to any house that you visit in Japan. So your genkan is both a literal physical space, but it's also a symbolic border between the inside and the outside world. So any house, like I said, that you come to, you're going to cross that threshold of the genkan. Now, this space that I just stepped onto is unique to this space. So Shofuso was designed in part after an actual 17th century guest house in a larger Buddhist temple complex. And this area here would have been kept open for messages to be received. So the guests would stay here, and the message would be brought right here. And you can see as I'm entering here, we have 1, 2, 3 steps. So you have this kind of formality built into the architecture where the messenger is down here. Not only are they down there, but they're probably down on their knees, relaying whatever message to the very important guest needs to be relayed. And the class, the status is kind of built into that space. But we're all going to be on the same level playing field here, entering in through the shikidai. And then I'm going to bring you out to our main veranda and our first kind of big viewing garden here. So this is our main viewing garden at Shofuso. It's sometimes referred to as a hill and pond garden. The way that the house is laid out, it's really intended to be seen from these interior spaces. So from the veranda or from one of the rooms here. When you look out to the garden, it's laid out in a horizontal way, similar to the way a scroll painting would be done. And like I said, this is sometimes referred to as a hill and pond garden. You have the rolling hills here and your pond. But it's also meant to be viewed as a living landscape painting. So the orientation is important and the vantage point is important. More than just being a living landscape painting, it's also meant to represent the world in miniature. So this microcosm of the world is right here at your fingertips, the whole world. The rolling hills representing the mountains of the world. Behind the waterfall, the greenery there being the forest and mountains. The pond is the ocean. Japan is made up of a chain of islands, so you have that represented by the stones in the garden. And then you'll see that we have many different koi throughout the pond, almost like brush strokes of light or color moving through the pond. And so I mentioned that there was the two-story temple gate that was here. It was brought around 1909 and was here in the park all the way up till the mid-1950s. And this was just open to the public. Anyone could stroll in at any time, and people did. And so there were these different bouts of vandalism that happened. At one point, the city really didn't know what to do with the space or how to secure it. They decided that they were going to do one last repair. They put up scaffolding, and by the next day, the whole house had burned to the ground. So there's some speculation. It was never confirmed what happened, but the speculation was that someone flicked a cigarette butt. You have this old wood structure, and it just went up in flames. So now you've got this beautiful garden here, not the one that we're looking at, but the blueprint of that, and a pile of ashes. So luckily, at around the same time, you have this house, Shofuso, which is being part of an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. So Shofuso was designed in the early 1950s. It was the third and final installation in this ongoing series called A House in the Garden. And the first two were very, what we would consider now, mid-century modern kind of houses done by these contemporary European or American architects. For the third installation, they really wanted to showcase the way that traditional Japanese architecture had an influence on the modernists, design and architecture both. So the original idea was, let's get a minka home. Minka is your traditional farmhouse or more rural kind of house. Let's get a minka home, and we're just going to pull it up out of the mountainside, and we're going to bring it to the MoMA, we're going to plop it in the courtyard. And someone was like, well, I don't know if that's going to work, right? So instead, we had an architect by the name of Junzo Yoshimura that was tasked with designing this house. One thing to note about Junzo Yoshimura is he had never had any background or experience designing traditional Japanese houses. He himself was very much a modernist, and you'll see those kind of touches as you move through the house of modernism. But the guest house here, this main section, was really modeled largely after a pre-existing guest house called the Koji Inn, kind of outside of Kyoto in Atsu. Now, the house itself was completely constructed in Japan, in Nagoya, Japan. So how did they do this? So your traditional Japanese architecture makes use of wood joinery. This whole house is put together without any structural nails whatsoever. And in traditional Japanese architecture, this is because you are in a very earthquake-prone part of the world. So you need some flexibility, some wiggle room when those earthquakes hit. It was also convenient in that this house was built in Nagoya. It could then be taken apart, put in like 700 crates, shipped to New York City, and put back together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. So the wood here in this sample that I'm holding is a type of wood. It's called hinoki. It's a Japanese cypress. And the wood that was used for this house, so what we're standing on, the ceiling, the beams, almost the entire house is constructed of this one material, hinoki. It's a really significant wood in that it's naturally pest resistant, it's naturally rot resistant, it's soft, it ages well. You can see the different kind of colorations as you move throughout the house that you wouldn't even know that it was the same wood. If I look at the ceiling here, it has almost this stained quality to it. This is a very mineral-rich wood, so you're seeing a lot of that iron that has come out over time, and because of the way that the roof is slanted, you have that kind of stained effect happening there. So the house was put back together at the Museum of Modern Art. It was there for 2 seasons, and crated back up, put into storage, again, at the same time that you have the Neomon Temple Gate burning down. So while it was unfortunate that it burned down, it really opened up this space to have Shofuso come here. And Shofuso has been here since 1958, open to the public. Now, when it comes to the roof of the house, this is something that's really unique to this space. So again, same wood, hinoki, the Japanese cypress, but instead of the wood of the tree, you're now looking at the bark. When the hinoki is about 100 years old, you can completely strip the bark from the tree without doing harm to it. And then you cut it into these thin strips, which are then put in row by row, layer after layer. And you'll see as we move through the house just how kind of thick and expansive our roof is. The hinoki bark roof is not something that's commonly done in Japan, let alone in the rest of the world. So our hinoki bark roof is the only one that you're going to find outside of Japan, anywhere else in the world. The roof was completely redone in 1999. So at the time, you had about 100 craftsmen who knew the technique of this style of roof. And out of that 100, like probably 80 of them were over 80. So they were able to get 10 craftsmen to come to the US, and the whole project took about a month. It would have been the first time that they would have done the roof as one whole project rather than shipping roof tiles and putting them in. So this was a huge undertaking. In 1999, replacing the roof cost $1.2 million. That's over 20 years ago. So ever since then, we've had every 5 to 7 years regular upkeep and maintenance to the roof. So we're going to take a look at the main interior space here. Really where the garden is meant to be viewed from is in this 15 mat room. So you can see if I'm sitting in the 15 mat room, it almost creates the illusion that the water line comes right up to the veranda. And I mentioned earlier the idea of the scroll painting. You see it a little bit more if you kind of divide the space using the beams that are here in the room. So the style of architecture for the guest house is called Shoin Zukuri, or desk-centered style. And what you have in this room is a built-in writing desk. So to my right here, this is my shoin, or study desk. Such an important feature of this room that the entire architectural style is named after it. So as a guest here, this is where I would do my reading, my writing. Not something that everyone had access to in the 17th century. For inspiration, I could open up these shoji screens, and that's going to give me a view into a different section of the garden, which is our roji, or tea garden. Another common feature in Shoin-zukuri style architecture is your chigadana, or your staggered shelves. And from there, that leads over to the tokonoma. So your tokonoma is a place to display artwork, to hang scrolls. And some people might mistake it for a bench. I think it would be considered highly disrespectful to sit on someone's tokonoma, only second to walking into someone's house with your shoes on. Ours is kept pretty open, and that is so we have a full view of our Hiroshi Senju murals here, so the waterfall murals. And these were gifted to us by the artist Hiroshi Senju and have been here since 2007, replacing the original murals that were unfortunately vandalized in the 1970s. So one of the things that I really like about the waterfall murals, particularly in the morning time when we're doing kind of opening tasks, one of the things that we do is go behind the waterfall in the garden, which we don't let visitors do, right? And I'm there sweeping the runoff to the pond, and on my way back I like to stop just by the lantern out there where the waterfall is, once these doors have been opened and removed. And I have the waterfall there, and I'm looking into the waterfall here, and just having the waterfall murals in conversation with the waterfall in the pond. Now, an added layer to that is on a rainy day with this hinoki bark roof, it's going to soak up a lot of the water, but it can only hold so much, and then you're going to get this effect, almost waterfall effect, where the water is just going to come down in this clean sheet. So if you're standing here looking out, you've got the waterfall effect happening from the roof, you've got the waterfall murals, and you've got the waterfall of the pond. So all these things in conversation with each other. So I think I called this the 15 mat room. Every room that we have in the house, we just talk about the number of tatami mats. And so your tatami is a woven rice straw. It's 6 feet by 3 feet, and then it's about 2 inches thick of just woven rice straw. And the idea is that one tatami mat equals one person. So to have a guest stay in a 15 mat room, it speaks to their wealth, their status. For context, the apartment that I lived in Japan, sharing with my wife and 2 kids, it was about half the size. So the 4 of us, when we put our futon out, would have to overlap them just to fit 4 futon in our room. So, you know, you got 15 mats here, you're doing all right. And you could even open up these sliding panels in here, the fusuma, and you've got another 10 that you have access to as well. This is a flexible space, so kept open because you're going to do everything in this room, from eat to sleep to write, work. Everything that you need to do, you do here in the room. And Japan being, it was and is very much a floor-based culture. You're doing everything on the floor. So with the hinoki, you're going to see that it's been planed down really smooth. You've got these ornamental pieces here. It's called a nail hide, and it's doing nothing but decorative work. The fact that this is metal in a 17th century context speaks to, again, the affluence. Because if you were using metal for anything other than cookware, agriculture, or weaponry, it was seen as unnecessary. So it's a little extra. And you'll also notice the way that the plastering, it's this clean, white, smooth finish. You'll see the way that that changes as we move towards the tea house, which we're going to do over here. Shofuso is made of 3 different architectural styles, made of 3 different garden styles. So you've got the main guest house and the viewing garden, and now we're moving into the roji or tea garden and the tea house style of architecture. Looking at the tea garden, you can see it's a little bit more rustic, a little bit more natural. I don't know if you can see through the maples here, but there's a stone bench on the other side. That's going to be where your guests for the tea ceremony are going to wait to be received. Once they get that signal from the host that they're ready for them, your guest is going to make their way through these stone paths here. And you can see each stepping stone is intentionally kept uneven. And the idea is that as you make your way through the tea garden, you really have to be intentional with each step that you take. This is a way to slow down, calm your mind, as you prepare for the tea ceremony. And just like we had at the entrance of the house, that space between the inner and outer, you have the same thing happening in the tea garden. With the bamboo fence here, that gate would be closed, and when you open that up and you step into the interior space, and close that gate behind you, you are now leaving all of your cares, all of your worries, all of the stresses of the day on the other side of that bamboo fence, and you're entering into this interior space with a clear mind. So you've got your clear mind, now you need to clean your hands. You're going to do that at the basin over here. So the way that you would approach the basin, there would be a scoop, bamboo scoop, and you would pick that up. You would first rinse your left hand and then move to rinse your right. You would rinse your mouth, and then the last thing that you would do is you would fill that ladle one last time, and you would tilt it like this and let the water run over the handle, so you're washing the handle for the next guest who's going to use it before you place it back down. So now you've got your clear mind, you've got your clean hands, you're ready to enter into the tea house. You can see the entrance of the tea house here. And the entryway is designed in a way that when you walk in, you are forced to bow on your way in. You're humbling yourself before your host. Now, believe it or not, the entryway to our tea house we refer to as a nobleman's entrance because it's about twice the height of your typical tea house entrance. So imagine if that stopped halfway, you would be crawling in to the tea house. We're going to enter the tea house from the host's entrance. This is a space that, as a guest, you wouldn't typically see. Before we do that, I just wanted to call your attention to the way that the plastering has now changed in terms of texture, color, the difference between the plaster that we saw in the guest house and the tea house. You'll see that with the hinoki as well. So this is your mizuya, your water room. This is where all of the preparation before, during, and after any tea ceremony is going to take place. And we do have a tea school, local tea school, that practices out of our tea house. So we have Yorusenke, and they use this space when we have our larger tea demonstrations open to the public in all of their preparation. So kind of a behind the scenes peek into the tea house. You can see the hinoki here and the way that it's kept in a more natural state with some of the knots intact, more rounded pieces. So the idea of your tea house is that when you enter the tea house, it's supposed to feel like this hermit's den in the middle of the forest that you just stumbled upon. So it's in this rustic setting, kind of set away from everything else around the property, which is slightly different from the way that our house is laid out. Now, this house had to fit within the courtyard space of the MoMA, so those design factors had to be considered, and the house was designed as an exhibition house always. So there are certain elements that you're not going to find in a more traditional setting. The fact that we just kind of strolled over here from the veranda, that here we are in the tea house, that's a little bit different than what you would find in someone else's property. But you have the bamboo flooring here. This allows for drainage when you're preparing your matcha bowls and everything that you need to prepare for the tea ceremony. And then your host is going to enter the main space here. You gotta watch your head here on the way in, and then remember on the way out too, because that's where I forget. So this is your host's area, and then again the guests would enter through here. What's really nice about the guest space here is they have this really great view, not only of our roji or tea garden, but it kind of goes all the way out to the main viewing garden as well. So you get a really nice view of that section of the garden. Just like we saw in the 15 mat room with the tokonoma, you have that scaled down to tea house size. So you have the scroll hanging here, you have a very simple arrangement that's done. This is an area that if you were a guest to the tea ceremony, it would be a focal point, a place for you to admire the arrangements, to admire the scrolls that were hanging. They're always going to reflect some sense of seasonality, and in Japan, you definitely have more than 4 seasons. You've got the cutaway here. Gives you a sense of the way that this plaster is held together using the bamboo lattice. One of the cool features of your tea house is in the winter months, when you are practicing tea, you're going to open up this space here. And you're going to have your charcoal fire right in this section. So you're going to heat your water inside the room. It's also going to warm up the room. With houses like this, a lot of people ask, well, how would you heat the house in the winter months? And so we always say that you heat the person, not the room. So it's very localized right here. So from the tea house, we're going to take a peek at the bathhouse area, which is weirdly one of my favorite parts of the house. So again, watch your head on the way out here. In this kind of like early evening, I really like the way that the light comes through the shoji screens. You get all these silhouettes and shadows that come through from the bamboo outside, from the leaves of the cherry tree that we have here. So you're always, dealing with like ever-changing light and shadow through the house all day. So this is our bathhouse area, another kind of smaller space, rustic space in here. And you have your ofuro, your bath over here. So your water would be brought in from outside. From where I am, I can see where that hole is here. All the water would be heated outside and then fill up the bathtub. Now, the way that this works, baths work, is you're taking a bath every day. Bathing culture was and still is very much a huge part of Japan. This comes from purity, ideas of purity with Shintoism. So in your family, the way that it works is oldest member of the family gets first bath, all the way down to youngest who gets last bath. So if you are the oldest, you're going to come in and you get the freshest, hottest water. Now, if it's too hot in here, one of the things that you can do is you can slide this open. And this is going to allow for some ventilation in the space. And if you're the last one in the bath and the water is kind of lukewarm, then you probably want to close this up and retain some of that heat. But no matter what spot in line you have for the bath, the water is going to be kept relatively clean because you're doing all of your washing outside of the bathtub. So you would do all of your washing before you step in, and then this space is really just to relax and soak. The whole bath hierarchy never worked in my family. I have 2 young kids who would always get first bath, and they would splash and play and get the whole bath wet. And by the time you got them out and ready for bed, then our bath was no longer warm, so we wouldn't do it. This section right here is a great vantage point of the roof to give you a sense of just how expansive it is and how much hinoki bark went into constructing that roof. Now you can see the hinoki bark roof, there's nothing in terms of gutter system. But then when you look at the roof above the bathhouse and tea house, it's done in a different style of wood shingles. Still hinoki, but wood shingles, so you do need to have this gutter system in place. And in trying to fit with the rustic aesthetic of the tea house, you would often have just bamboo split down the middle, and that would be your gutter. Now, we talked about the use of metal throughout the house. Again, this is a copper that's made to look like bamboo. And it's going to lead to this downspout here, which is our kusari doi, or rain chain, doing the work of a downspout, but doing it in a more aesthetic way. So I'm going to show you how that works. Get some water from our basin. Give you a sense of what that would look like if it were raining today. So it just has this really nice aesthetic element. And you get the sense of what that would look like if we did have, if you came on a rainy day, which we do actually advise visitors to come on a rainy day. Come and check it out, because you would have all of the rain chains going on that rainy day, and you would stay dry here in the house. So this section here is our third and final example of the garden that we have. And this is called your subo niwa. So subo can mean two different things. Niwa is any garden, but your subo, depending on the kanji characters that you use to write it, it could either mean, it could be a measurement, which is roughly the size of 2 tatami mats, or if you write it in a different character, it could mean container or water vessel, because this is meant to be a garden in a very tight, enclosed space, a courtyard space. And so you would have, in most cases, a water vessel where you would have that water feature. It would become part of your daily gardening practice to each morning scoop the water from the basin, clean the basin out, and then put fresh water in. We're also fortunate that we have an actual natural body of water moving through. So this is Lansdowne Creek that is moving through our site as well and leading to the pond. But your subo niwa tends to be a more shaded and enclosed area. So you're going to see things like moss and ferns and the hosta in this kind of space, more so than bigger plants that require more sunlight. And our subo niwa actually leads us to the last architectural style too. So we're going to move along. This is a narrower section of the veranda. This gives you more of a sense of the way that Engawa, the veranda area, kind of looks in traditional Japanese houses, that more narrow rather than more sunken in to the house. And as you make your way through, you'll see all of these repairs that have been done along the way. So this is where a lot of the weathering has happened. So you get some really interesting repair work as you make your way through. And so while we in the US may refer to this as a Dutch repair, this really is in line with one of the 7 design principles of Zen. So this aesthetic is known as wabi-sabi. One of the most popular examples of wabi-sabi, one of the most familiar, is the idea of kintsugi, or the pottery repair with gold leaf. But the idea is that you are, rather than trying to hide the natural aging process or the natural wear and tear, you are calling attention to it. You are accentuating that because the belief is that there's an inherent beauty in the aging and in the wear and tear. And as things age, they actually become even more beautiful. So that's what you're seeing here with these very intentional repairs that have been done. So I'm making my way to the kitchen. And like I said, this is going to be our final example of architecture in the house. So I think I mentioned that the original idea, when they wanted to bring something traditionally Japanese to the MoMA, was to pluck a minka home, a farmhouse style home from rural Japan, and put it in the courtyard space. So this was the concession that was made. We're going to design the kitchen in a minka style. So minka really is your people's architecture. We refer to it as farmhouse style. And some of the most common features of the minka are your lower area here. This is your doma. And traditionally this would be earthen or clay-packed flooring. Now, the reason for that is because you've got your cooking stove, your hearth here, so you do that for fire prevention. It also keeps it cooler in the summer months. We had our genkan, our entryway, where we left our shoes. You can see one of the smallest genkans I've ever seen right here. So they would stay down there. They would only be used in the doma area. You have your stove here. So it's a wood-burning stove. The largest area would be to cook your soups and stews. The one in the middle would be for stir fry, and then that one on the end is for cooking rice. Now, fun fact about Shofuso: when it came to Philadelphia, it's the first time that they're going to be pouring, cement here to fix this stove in place. And when they did that and they set the stove down, they didn't realize until it was too late that they had put the stove in backwards. So we are looking at the back of the stove. Now, if it was facing the way it should be, we'd be looking at 3 stoke holes. So you could build the fire, in the area that you wanted to without setting the wall on fire. But one of the things to also note with the idea of there being a wood-burning stove here is that there is no chimney, right? So chimneys weren't part of the architectural vocabulary of Japan. So instead you have this higher, more pitched roof. And then similar to the ventilation that I showed you in the bathhouse, you have the ability to open and close these upper areas here to allow the smoke out. So it's going to rise high enough that you're not in it, and then it's going to be able to escape through this area here. All of that smoke is actually, it creates a desirable effect on the wood. So you don't see it in our house, but if you look at other Minka houses, you'll see that everything's kind of been blackened by the smoke and the soot, and it creates this really nice, desirable effect on the wood and almost preserves it in a way. So Minka homes, all the way up into like the mid 20th century, were a common thing to find. Now they've become part of this almost like epidemic of abandoned houses in Japan. One of the interesting things about just Japanese architecture and design is the way that everything is meant to slide open or be removed. So you create these more open spaces, it's a breathable space. So if a house gets abandoned and it isn't being opened up, the house doesn't get to breathe, and you'll find that it just will deteriorate rapidly. So that's what you find with these older Minka homes. Some other features of the Minka house that we have, or Minka kitchen that we have here, if you scooped some of the charcoal from the stove, you could lay that in this space right here. This is your irori. And in some older houses, they would have a larger irori, and that would be kind of like their fireplace where everyone gathers around. With this, you can imagine that there would be a thin mesh grate that would go over this, and then you could use this to also grill your fish, your chicken, your yakitori, and other vegetables. So you would use that as another cooking space. This area here is for your fresh water, so that's going to be brought in from a well every day, and you would use that for everything from cooking to washing. And it also creates this kind of cool, around this area you can find these spring houses that were pre-electricity. How do you keep things cool before refrigeration? And so they have these areas that were filled with water, and you would keep your food there to make it last longer. So you have something similar going on here, where you've got this filled with water, and then this space opens up here, and this becomes your root cellar right next to the, and when I put my hand here, I can feel the difference in temperature. So try to utilize all the spaces, all these little nooks and crannies here. This gives you another idea of I sometimes refer to this as the 17th century space heater. So this would be another way to heat the space. Oftentimes in the winter, you'll have a low table. It'll have this cutout in the middle. You can imagine at that point, they would lay that in, and this would keep under the table warm. You'd be able to keep the kettle going there. So this is called a kutatsu. Now you've got kutatsus that kind of have a space heater built into them, or you're putting a blanket over it, an electric blanket, to keep yourself warm. But this would have been the way that it would have worked at that time. Our one piece of non-fixed furniture is in the kitchen as well, and this is your tansu. Your tansu comes in all different shapes and sizes. So in this case, it would be for all of your kitchenware, but it may be a different kind of chest of drawers where you're going to keep your kimono, depending on where the tansu is. In our case, what you're seeing here is all of the materials that our local chapter of Ikebana International uses for the flower arrangements that they do weekly throughout our open season. So they need a place to store all of the vases and all of the flower stands of frogs that they use. You'll open up some of these drawers and you'll find just like a drawer full of stones. So really kind of cool space here. And the fact that, we've been able to kind of adapt these spaces to meet our needs. And then that leads us out to this antechamber here. This is sort of the division between the kitchen area and the guest house. You can imagine if there was a guest staying at the guest house, this would be the place where their meal would be the last stop for their meal before it was brought to the room. So you have this tray here. A low table would be set up in the 15-mat room. The tray would be brought in. Once they were finished with their meal, all of that would be brought back out. And so that space, again, is kept open, clear. So the idea of minimalism is very much ingrained in the aesthetic of Shoinzukuri and Japanese design and architecture in general. And that leads us back to where we started and where we left our shoes. So one of the amazing things about Shofuso is the garden, the house. It's really meant to be seen in all 4 seasons. So there's always something that is being highlighted at any given time of the year. So we just had our cherry blossoms have come and gone. All of our azaleas are kind of popping now. But even as we get into full summer, then it just becomes about all the different shades of green that you're going to see throughout the garden. As fall enters, then you have the fall foliage of the maples, and then our winter garden, which we're here up until mid-December. It's all about just the evergreens, and if and when it snows, then you get the features of the snow around the pond as well. So yeah, I advise people to come kind of like check in every once in a while, see what else is changing, what's happening in the garden, because depending on the day that you come, whether it's a sunny day like today or on a rainy day where you wouldn't think to come to the garden, you might be surprised by what you find.